hear me? Yes. And thank you for the honor to moderate this session with Dr. Marko Čudić. Nice to meet you. And would you like to present? Would you like to present our first speaker?
Yes, thank you, Lydia. I would like to present now Mr. Dr. Branko Ostajmer from the Croatian Institute of History from Zagreb, and I think the whole session is very exciting, intellectually exciting. And without further ado, I would really like to give the word to Branko. The title of his presentation today is "The Everyday Life on the Bank of Danube in Vukovar," in the town of Vukovar in the second half of the 19th century. So I guess it's all this Habsburg, post-Habsburg situation and post-Yugoslav situation. We have the post situations. Thank you, Branko, and please, you have the word.
Thank you, Marko.
Just one. Oh, sorry. Maybe I'm a little bit unconventional, so sorry for this.
Okay, thank you, Marko. Anyway, and dear colleagues, I would like to greet you all. And at the same time, I would also like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to participate in such nice round table. However, I hope that such Zoom round tables will not become commonplaces, and that we will soon be able to return to the usual way of holding conferences, with the opportunity to get to know each better during breaks, to exchange experience, to open new topics. And who knows, maybe some of such occasions will occur soon, and maybe somewhere on the banks of the Danube. It would be nice, I think. In the previous part of this roundtable, I've enjoyed 4 excellent presentations in which I learned a lot. And now I hope that my topic, which is relatively narrow, will also be interesting, and that such topic can also be a small stone in better understanding the rich history of the Danube and the people who lived on its banks. First of all, it's necessary to say something more about the city of Vukovar, a relatively small city located on the right bank of the Danube, approximately in the middle of the total river flow. Vukovar port is located at 1,335th kilometer downstream of the Danube. Today, Vukovar is located in the northeastern part of the Republic of Croatia, on the border of the regions of Slavonia and Srijem, and is the seat of the Vukovar-Srijem county. Let it be here also mentioned that the total course of the Danube through Croatia is 188 kilometers, or to be more precise, during this part of Danube, the Danube makes a border between Croatia and the Republic of Serbia. Vukovar stretches along its entire length along the right bank of the Danube, where for centuries Central European cultural influences met those of the wider Balkan and Mediterranean area. The Danube has more than anything marked the history of Vukovar, whose written history lasts for 9 centuries. But the Danube also marked the history of that area in earlier periods. The wider area of the city of Vukovar has been permanently inhabited since the Neolithic period. In the 3rd millennium BC, an Neolithic culture developed in this and wider area, and it is called the Vučedol culture, after the Vučedol site on the Danube next to the Vukovar. At the end of the 20th century, the settlement of Vukovo developed at the place where the river Vuka flows into the Danube. Vukovo developed further in the following years and became the seat of the county. Later, from 1526 to 1687, Vukovar was part of the Ottoman Empire. The city was liberated during the Vienna War, and on that occasion it was displaced, the population was displaced and the city was burned. So a new settlement was established on the site of the former city. With the establishment of the Austrian rule, this settlement came under the administration of the court chamber, which in 1728 sold the estate to Count Ferdinand Kufstein, and as early as 1736, the estate passed into the possession of the Eltz family. The Eltz family is one of the oldest German noble families and has been mentioned since 20th century. Since 12th century, sorry. Eltz family was the owner of the Vukovar manor from 1736 till 1945. The family also built a large Baroque-style castle in Novi Vukovar, and this castle also had a carefully landscaped garden along the Danube bank. In the center of Vukovar, as I already mentioned, is the confluence of the river Vuka and the Danube. Vuka is a small river of total 122 kilometers long, and its course divides Vukovar into two historical parts, the Old and New Vukovar. Old Vukovar, on the right bank of Vuka, was built spontaneously and irregularly. Historically, this is the middle-class commercial and craft district of Vukovar, and it's still today the town center. New Vukovar, much smaller, located on the left Vuka bank, with a planned network of streets, was not inhabited until the early 18th century. It was originally a feud held by the Eltz family, but later on it was also used by the county administration and finally by the military garrison. The bridge over the Vuka connected Stari and Novi Vukovar, but the inhabitants lived in two separate municipalities until the unification of the municipalities in 1873, just like as Budapest, as we know. As already mentioned, a new era in the history of Vukovar began in 1687, when the city was liberated. However, the liberated areas were devastated, and the Habsburg authorities pursued a settlement policy in order to settle the sparsely populated areas of the Hungarian and Croatian parts of the monarchy. Among the settlers sent to the eastern and southeastern parts of the monarchy, most were of German descent. The organized settlement of the Germans in these areas took place in three waves, and the first began after the Ottomans left these areas. The process of systematic settlement of the German population, primarily from the southwestern parts of the German-speaking area, began in late 17th century, immediately after the end of the Vienna War and the suppression of the Ottomans from the Hungary, Slavonia, Srem, Bačka, and Banat. And it lasted until the middle of the 19th century. Settlement, for which the name colonization has become common in historical research, was carried out in organized manner. In Vukovar, the Germans settled especially on the outskirts of the old Vukovar, where a separate city district was formed, and this district, due to the ethnic and linguistic affiliation of its population, would be colloquially called Švabsko Brdo, or Schwabenberg, or Schwabenberg, as its inhabitants called it. Such a large wave of German immigration will contribute to the formation of the ethnic structure of the city population, in which the Germans were the second largest ethnic group, just behind the Croats. Such a demographic situation of Vukovar would remain until 1945, when there was a drastic drop in the number of the Germans in the city. There were also other communities in such multinational and multi-structural mosaic of Vukovar, and at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, a large Serbian community was present in the city, as well as a wealthy community of Jews, mostly merchants. There were also other settlers who mostly arrived along the Danube. In the Ružička family of Czech origin in year 1887 was born a son called Lavoslav, who would later become a famous chemist, the first winner of the Nobel Prize of Croatian origin in year 1939. The economic development in Vukovar was based at first on shipping, and at the end of the 19th century, the railway became more and more important, especially after the construction of the railway in Vukovar in 1878. The role of Vukovar in traffic was large even in the earlier period, and it's in the middle of the 19th century, it was said that the Vukovar was famous for the export and import of Bosnian goods. And it was the time when, as we know, Bosnia and Herzegovina was firmly under the Ottoman Empire. Although the Danube brought a lot of goods to the Vukovar and to its citizens, the river also caused many difficulties. The biggest difficulties that the Danube caused to the people of Vukovar were, of course, floods. In some periods, the Danube would threaten to overflow from year to year. And among the numerous floods during the last 2.5 centuries, those from 1769, 1827, 1853, 1876, 1907, 1920, and 1924 are one of the biggest. The time frame of this paper includes two major Vukovar floods from 1876 and 1907. The frightening flood of 1876 came in February due to the sudden melting of snow. The City Chronicle testifies that it destroyed about 180 houses. On the old stone bridge over the Vuka, which unfortunately no longer exists, stood a nail that marked the highest water level in earlier year. In February 1876, that nail remained 70 inches below the water level. The next great flood in 1907 flooded the streets along the Danube again, and the whole Bačka looked, as one witness said, like a waste sea. What it was like to live on the bank in modest houses in conditions when you have a big flood every 20 years and a small one every year, we can only imagine today. Here are a few descriptions of the time that can illustrate these unhealthy, painful living conditions. I quote, "And now these alleys have been flooded for several days. The occupants have partially moved. The walls of the houses are sucking moisture. The basements are full of water. A pile of mud is accumulating from which all kinds of miasmas and various diseases develop." End of quotation. Around 1870, the Danube bank began to be gradually fortified in Vukovar. So in 1880, cobblestones were laid, and in 1885, the first systematic naming of the streets, squares, and streets was carried out. This naming, of course, bore the mark of the political circumstances of the time. The promenade along the Danube was named after Croatian Ban or governor Dragutin Kuen Hedervari. This governor wasn't very popular in Croatia because he was, from the most of the people, seen as Hungarian man. But local authorities had to keep good relations with Kuen's government in Croatia, and so it's reasonable that they called this promenade the most beautiful part of the city by Kuen's name. On the other hand, on the left bank of the Vuka in Novi Vukovar, there was another promenade named after the heir of the throne, Archduke Rudolf, the only son of the ruler Francis Joseph, the heir to the throne who failed to inherit the throne since 4 years later he died in the famous tragedy at Merling Castle. At the end of the 19th century, bathing and swimming became more and more a form of entertainment and leisure, but at the same time there was a growing awareness of the importance of bathing not only for hygiene, but also for proper physical development. This awareness was also encouraged by the Croatian provincial government, especially by its educational authorities. Also, like many other larger places along the rivers, Vukovar at the turn of the 19th and 20th century had a large bathing area that was in private hands and where the entrance fee was charged. I will skip one part and continue here. In addition to the practices in the Danube as a form of pleasure and leisure, in the first years of the 20th century, or the very end of the time frame that is the subject of my interest, we find the beginnings of more serious professional sports. In this context, undoubtedly the most prominent place belongs to the Vukovar Rowing Club, founded in 1912, which still exists today. At the turn of the 19th and 20th century, rich social life took place on the Vukovar bank of the Danube, which included many outdoor parties on the Danube itself, and important gathering places were numerous taverns and inns. Events of various kinds were held on the banks of the Danube, but there were even those that took place on the Danube itself. Here is one example. The important I will skip this. I think that I have 3 or 4 minutes left, Marko. 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. I would like to use this minutes just to show you few pictures to get an image of what was the look of this bank of Vukovar, of the Danube in Vukovar. And I will try to do it now. No. Neither. Nothing.
I have allowed to share other participants. It should be already, yes.
Is it okay now?
No. Sure.
So here is the bank of the Danube. Here you can see Franciscan church and monastery. And here is a big and very nice synagogue, which was unfortunately destroyed in 1941 or during the Second World War. Here these are the marks which mark the great floods of Danube in Vukovar. This is the 1876, 1965, and 2006. This is the oldest mark, which is similar to the one in Budapest, which marks this famous flood of 1838. This is the view of the Vukovar from the Danube. The steamship station. Also the steamship, and one old postcards which also shows these are the mills, the old mills which existed till the first half of the 20th century. And this is the look of the garden of the Elt Castle on the right of on the bank of the Danube. And I think that my time is up, and I will stop here. And I hope that I will send my paper.
Thank you, Branko, very much.
Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you. As a child who grew up on the Tisa riverside in Senta, I can only appreciate any town that has a river, and that's completely different settlement for I think for a development in some sense, even artistic ones, like in James Joyce, you can have these epiphanies by the river. Really, it's half a joke, but it's really true. So should I give what I mean, Lydia? What is the?
Does anybody have questions? Maybe you.
Oh yeah,
yes.
Isn't the discussion after all the sections, or there's
smaller questions now and more general questions after.
During the discussion. If you have a brief question, you can ask.
It's Edith.
Yes.
Yes, Edith Kiri. So.
Edith has a question.
Vukovar only from the literature, and there is a writer, Pavel Pavlici.
Yes.
Who wrote an amazing book about the Danube in Vukovar. I mean, it's fantastic, and it's also about the everyday life. I mean, I have very rarely read something so witty about floods, for example, which are, according to him, regular guests there. And I was wondering, is he a part of this self-image of Vukovar, or is it just something that a literary scholar would know? I mean, is it something that Vukovar considers as his own writer?
Pavel Pavličić.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. I think that Pavel Pavličić if we speak of literature and then the Danube in Croatia, I think that anyone who knows anything about it, his first association would be Pavel Pavličić.
Okay.
Because, and especially this beautiful book, which is called simply Dunav and Danube. And I remember very well, I read it when I was in the second or third grade of the high school. It was 1996. I remember it just during the chemistry and biology, and it's really beautiful book. I don't know is it translated to the German or English. It has, I think, it has 3 or 4 issues in Croatian, and just I won't be longer, but just one. I would like to mention that Pavel Pavličić has published, I think, 104 or 155 books. He publishes 2 books every year, but the Danube has the main role in this book. But the Danube is present in probably 1/3 of his books, because he lives now for a long time in Zagreb, but Pavel Pavličić never left Vukovar. Yes, where he was born, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, I can just comment on that. It's translated into German.
Yes.
Parts of it are translated now into Hungarian, and they are going to be published in an anthology. Yeah.
Great.
Another question, maybe? I can ask then. Yes, thank you for your impressive presentation. And I have a question. Where was the safe place near the city? Where could people hide from floods?
Well, the greatest danger was actually for the people in this maybe 100 meters along the bank, because there it was really low area, and the other part all was higher, and so the old town was never actually in danger, especially because the town is settled on the hills, as you could see on some of the postcards. You have hills which are, there is one hill with Franciscan monastery, the other hill is with synagogue. This mentioned Schwabenberg, Schwabsko Brdo, is also a hill which is 100 meters tall. So the greatest danger was practically every year for the people who lived on the same on the bank.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And shall I present the next speaker?
Yes,
yes, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Edith Kiri. And we all know her book, The Danube is the Form, the Donau is the form. And as if I'm not wrong, your paper is a part of the big research project, Reading the Danube. And thank you for joining us. And please, we'll welcome you. Your Marko, please.
Yeah. And here is my PPT. Okay. Politics and Poetics of the River. I'm going to speak about literature in a broader sense of the word. That means not necessarily only literary texts involved, but also simply
very much echoing, so we barely hear you, or at least.
Okay. What I can do is to try the microphone. Is it better now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. In my lecture, I would like to deal with two books that describe the Danube as a whole, and in connection with it also provide a certain geographical, historical, and cultural knowledge. There are not many such books. This has to do with both the magnitude of the task and the range of subjects that must be considered. Oh. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to do something about PPT. Yes, here. Okay. The two books discussed below both date from the second half of the 20th century, from the 1960s and the 1980s. And in comparing them, the question arises, how have perceptions and narratives of the river changed in those 20 years? The point of view of the two Danube books shows many similarities. Although the only one of the two authors is German-speaking, only one of the two authors is German-speaking, the interest in the Danube is both springs primarily from an intimate knowledge of German-speaking culture and a less profound knowledge of the other cultures along the river. This cultural bias corresponds to the traditional point of view of most Danube compendia and has only recently been challenged by journalistic and literary projects that consciously adopt a different perspective. But the specific interest of the two books cannot be described as a German one, but rather as an Austrian one. As Trost puts it, as one travels along the German Danube, one feels everywhere that the river in Germany has taken a wrong turn, that the great currents of economic life follow other axes, are attracted by other poles, that the Danube country is a shade quieter than other areas, a shade less important and a shade poorer. The Danube has not even made it to the latest status symbol of a major German city, a Bundesliga club. Not Germany, but Austria was, according to Trost, the great Danube power. Accordingly, in the case of the two books to be discussed here, it was also the long-standing preoccupation with Austria, with Austrian history or literature, which preceded the Danube talks. Ernst Trost, whose Danube, the Life of a River, came out in 1968, had published his relevant Habsburg tracing a few years earlier with the title Das blieb vom Doppeladler, or in English that would be That Remained of the Double-Headed Eagle. Macris Danubio, on the other hand, can be understood as a late sequel to his dissertation, Der Habsburgische Mythos in der modernen österreichischen Literatur. That would be the Habsburg myth in the modern Austrian literature. Written 20 years earlier, which dealt with the literary afterlife of the Habsburg Empire. For Macris, however, not only the Habsburg Empire was relevant, but also in close connection with it, the concept of Central Europe. In the course of the 19th and the 20th century, Central Europe, in addition to its mostly informal imperial political conceptions, was repeatedly conceived as a counter-design to existing imperial orders. In the 1980s, discourses of Central Europe tended to be understood as offers of identity and pursued the strategic purpose of bringing the states beyond the Iron Curtain back into the Western center of Europe. Trost and Macris' Danube books are both based on the interweaving of a geographical and a historical perspective. Both authors have themselves traveled to the places they have described, but their works are far more than simple travel descriptions or travelogues. However, while Trost's Danube book is embedded in a discourse of the Cold War, Macris Danubio is a product of the new discourses on Central Europe that emerged in the 1980s. Ernst Trost's book was considered a standard work, I go back, published several times. Macris' Danube book, on the other hand, has seen at least 20 translations and numerous new editions. It has probably been widely acclaimed precisely because of its literary and intellectual character, and has been perpetuated several times in the forms of parodies and travesties. One of them is written by Peter Esterházy, and this is also quite well known. How can the discursive differences between the two books be captured? First, some key statements of the two texts should be noted. Of the topoi under which the meaning of the Danube has traditionally been negotiated, that of the bridge between East and West plays an important role for Ernst Trost. A topical theme that runs through this book he puts into the mouth of a representative of Bayerischer Lloyd at Regensburg. The Danube today belongs to the East. Accordingly, the book focuses on the ever-changing relationship between East and West as seen in the history of the Danube cities and also the Danube countries. Macris Danubio is characterized by a completely different core political theme. His central distinction between the Rhine and the Danube corresponds to the contrast between the German nation-state paradigm and the supranational state concept of the Habsburg Empire. Makris thus continues to write a basic idea of the Habsburgischer Mythos, published 20 years earlier. To the state myth he described in that first book, he created a landscape myth in the second, namely the difference between the Rhine and the Danube. The Danube is often enveloped in a symbolic anti-German aura. It is the river along which different peoples meet and mingle and crossbreed, rather than being, as the Rhine is, a mythical custodian of the purity of the race. It is the river of Vienna, Bratislava, Budapest, Belgrade, and of Dacia, the river which, as ocean encircled once the world of the Greeks, embraces the Austria of the Habsburgs. Although the Habsburg tradition is also important to Tost, he uses it more as a foil to contrast with the current political situation. Makris, on the other hand, finds traces of this Habsburg tradition almost everywhere. For him, however, it is linked not only to a tradition, but also to a political idea, which could be given the name Central Europe, and which, for Makris, also has utopian features. For the understanding of this part of Europe, however, not only explicit statements of the two texts are important, but also the way they structure the space and stage borders. Ernst Haas, The Danube, Life of a River, already takes into account the division of Europe in its structure. For in the first two chapters, it juxtaposes the end and the beginning of the river. In the first chapter, he describes the Soviet, now Ukrainian, Ismail, a town near the mouth on the northernmost Király branch, while in the second, he describes the headwaters of the Danube in Germany. Ismail surprises as a city marked by strong military presence and past. Guards, watchtowers, controls, and curfews set the mood, while the liveliness of the city is also introduced. Although Trost had apparently known the city from personal experience, he gives the chapter the title She Comrade Dunai, Genossin Dunai in German, and compares the river to a grandmother. The Danube also has something of a babushka about it, of one of the Russian grandmothers who travels with the grandchildren while the parents earn rubles. Babushka Dunai. Apparently, neither the author nor the publisher noticed that the name of the river is masculine in Russian, and this error was not corrected in subsequent editions of the book. The military endpoint is just juxtaposed with Donaueschingen in the second chapter of the book, which even in its disorderliness has something emphatically civilian about it. Finally, this juxtaposition is given political tropicality by the motto of the first edition. It was published in 1968. On the day this book went to the press, troops of the Soviet Union, Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary, and the GDR marched into Czechoslovakia. The hope for freedom that so many Czechs and Slovaks had cherished seemed gone. It was the motto. The juxtaposition of the beginning and end naturally comes to a head in the middle. At the Austrian-Czechoslovakian border, the Iron Curtain. Yevin, Devin, Theben, as it is called in the different languages that were around this place, was of course a place of transition from time immemorial. It was called Porta Hungarica, or also Hainburg Gate, or Hainburger Pforte in German, but in Trost's case, it becomes a dividing border. You can describe borders as institutions technically as well as symbolically. Modern borders that are condensed into a line are at the same time made recognizable by a kind of zone of imagination or experience. In order to become effective, the line must be occupied in space by signs, ensembles, rituals, images, and buildings, in the mind by various imaginations and behavioral doctrines. In Ernst Post's work, the Iron Curtain is such a line which, in addition to its technical function, is also symbolically charged. In describing it, a number of rhetorical and narrative devices are mustered. This picture just shows that this is a very market point anyway, even without this kind of symbolic that Trost uses. On the horizon, the four-towered castle of Pressburg rises out of the haze. He's just transgressing the border. A border stone on the right bank marks the end of what is generally called the Western world. A watchtower, one of those little huts on steel stilts, by which a state usually admits that it must guard its own citizens, has now also planted itself on the right bank, so that no one is in any doubt that there is a real borderline, a deep incision. Another continent begins, although the Danube continues to flow through Europe. First, the crossing of the border at the Hamburg gate is narrated repetitively. First, one leaves behind a boundary stone. A border stone on the right bank marks the end of what is commonly called the Western world, says Trost. Then a watchtower comes. Finally, there is a culinary aspect. The chief on board crumbles the most Hungarian of all spices into the soup as he crosses the border, as if to celebrate the passage of the Porta Hungarica by a symbolic gesture. But not only is the crossing repeated, the meaning of border is also reinforced by three synonyms: border, and incision. Of course, there is no lack of technical staffage like watchtowers and later soldiers. Yeah, okay. Finally, another, oh, sorry, I will still remain here. Finally, another dramaturgical trick should be mentioned, namely that, as so often in travel literature, the preceding travel section is rounded off by panoramas. These allow an overview that arranges the previously described details into coherency and also underlays them with a message. In travel literature, they usually serve as a farewell gesture, rounding off, drawing boundaries. In this specific case, it is about historical panoramas. Before the border, one finds a complete list of all hostile invasions of Austria, followed by vast places of the Habsburg monarchy, such as Ort Castle, where Crown Prince Rudolf also stayed before his death, Eckartsau, where an important scene of the film version of Josef Roth's Retzky March was shot, the ball at which the news of Franz Ferdinand's death bursts, turning the orderly celebration into a dance macabre. In addition, it is also mentioned that the last Habsburg emperor, Charles I, was expelled to Eckartsau in 1919, before he was removed from office. The fall of the Habsburgs is followed by the decline of the Roman Empire as a theme in Carnotto, which is also quite close to the border. Magris Danubio differs from Trost's book already in its structure. Although he had actually been traveling the Danube over the course of 4 years, his book is not told as a linear progression along the Danube, but as a vagabondage. Borders are not staged in Magris' work. He likes to linger at cafes and antiquarian bookstores, which represent precisely the multilingual and multicultural heritage of the region. The incisive character of the Iron Curtain is questioned by Magris in cultural terms. The part about Pannonia begins with a chapter heading At the Gates of Asia and is answered as follows. The Iron Curtain, which separates the spheres of influence of the two world powers between Austria and Hungary, tempts one to the pathos of great and unifying metapolitical definitions, to lapidary world historical bombos such as that of Prince Metternich, according to whom the Balkans, and thus also Asia, begin right at the Rennweg, the road across Vienna. This devotional pathos, which declares itself ideologically independent, is itself an ideological construct. Even a visit to a pastry or bookstore in Budapest refutes the view that undifferentiated Asian depth begins east of Austria. Instead of borders, it is about cultural differences, about fragmented and complex identities that cannot be easily categorized into an either-or. Identity is a central question of Magris' Danubium. While at the beginning it is discussed in the form of lengthy arguments, from Vienna, Bratislava, and Budapest on, it develops more and more into a theme that is exemplified by means of concrete biographies. At the beginning of the book, it says sweepingly, ever since Heraclitus, the river has been the image for the questioning of identity. And a few pages later at Immendingen, as I follow the curve of the banks, perhaps I know who I am. Further down the Danube, one author is then said to have switched identities. The literary scholar Miklós Szabolcsy had lost track of a certain Robert Reiter, or rather Reiter Robert, an avant-garde Hungarian poet who had been a member of the most embattled experimental groups. He learned, Miklós Szabolcsy learned that Reiter Robert was alive, that he lived in Timișoara in Romania, that he was now called Franz Liebhardt, and that he wrote somewhat traditional poems in German, sonnets and pieces rhyming A, B, A, B. He had changed his name, nationality, and literary style, and now he was honored as the patriarch of the German-speaking writers of the Banat. The questions of identity are, of course, connected with those of genre. While Trost was interested in what he saw, supplemented that with historical information that he dutifully categorized them by country. Magris quite often ignored country borders, relied on other texts, biographies, and concepts to reflect upon. Although his book can be read as a travelogue, its genre is much more complex, and it is hard to pin it down with one category. While there has been much debate as to whether Danubia should be considered a novel or a scholarly work, Magris seems to be intentionally ambiguous on this point, transcending the boundaries of genre, just as the boundaries of countries is itself a goal for his book. That was it. I hope I was in time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions to Dr. Király?
Thank you, Edith. Dr. Király. May I have a question? Sorry for. It is actually not a question. I just wanted to ask. There is so much, only in Hungarian literature, but in other literatures as well. You mentioned Esterházy, of course, but even in classical pieces, like the beginning of or the first half of the 20th century. And I will now only quote Peter Zolman's translation of Attila József's totally famous poem By the Danube. And in the end of the poem, in Zolman's translations, it reads, I want to work. It's hard for human nature to make a true confession of the past. The Danube, which is past, present, and future, entwines the waves in tender, friendly clasp. Out of the blood our fathers shed in battles, flows peace through our remembrance and regard. Creating order in our common matters, this is our duty, and it will be hard, says Attila Joseph. Through Peter Zollman's, I think, excellent translation. But somehow it emerges to me that somebody mentioned, I think Milan mentioned in the I almost said morning session, but in the last session, that this brotherhood and unity, which is quite ironical today, of course, in this but it is really some kind of this proto ideology, which for some reason it's in this river conflict on the one hand, and then all this. I'm sorry for not being there. I'm totally debilitated by this Zoom, and I know I sound like an idiot. And I will shut down. I shut up now. I don't even want to know what I wanted to ask. Sorry, it is not even a question. Sorry, but if you think it is, then you can answer me at it. Sorry, but it was really a good. I like your presentation.
Okay, I would just say that I think it's very different what people think about this Central Europe, this idea, what they connect with it, and this is what I also try to say, that you've seen how many times Magris has been translated, and I think I could collect only a part of it because I'm sure it has been translated even in other languages, but I didn't have enough time, and it didn't have enough space. But I think it was successful, but partly because of its literary and intellectual nature, and partly because it was published in the 80s, and it had hit a nerve of the time. It was something very up to date at that time. And of course, it has been republished because it is not only this kind of embeddedness in a discourse of the time. That's why it's still being read. But I think you cannot just speak of Central Europe in general. It's always different what we mean by it. There existed also an imperialistic version of Central Europe. I mean, to be honest, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Raz?
I have a short comment only. I made one interview with György Konrad, Hungarian writer and essayist, and he told to me that in the 1980s was a revolutionary idea in the literature of Central Europe. And he told to me that organized an international pen congress in New York, and three representatives was the most important representatives of the idea of Central Europe. 3K, Danilo Kiš, Milan Kundera, and György Konrad. And very interesting the reaction of the Russian authors, Russian writers, because protested for that and named to disloyalty. And very interesting, independently from the location, who lived in Soviet Union and lived in emigration, the concept was the same, that realized this is the disloyalty of countries like Hungary, Czechoslovakia, or Yugoslavia. It was very interesting, a revolutionary meaning of this Central European idea.
Yeah. I think
Yes, Oxana, Yakimenko, yes.
I have a very short comment. Thank you very much for a beautiful presentation. I was really, it was really captivating. I even wrote to my editor about the German book while listening to you. The comment is very short. I wanted to make about the Magris book that has been translated into Russian.
Yeah.
Interestingly, it went almost unnoticed. also due to the fact that the translation of the book was very imperialistic. So it was translated by someone who had totally no knowledge, I mean, almost no knowledge of the Central Europe, and a lot of things were completely disregarded. So it came out as a, well, practically a flop in translation. So there was no reaction, no real reaction to it.
Yes, but to be honest, when I read this Asia, at the gates of Asia, several times, I thought, I cannot imagine that Magris would write it today. I mean, it's a horror to write something like that, but he's also, this is cultural bias. I mean, that if it's not Western Europe, then it's Asia, right? This kind this kind of labeling, right? And also this, obviously, this, how to say that, it means something pejorative, right? Although we could say being Asian is fantastic, right? So it's something that now nobody in the position of Magris would say or write. That's my opinion. But I think that at that time he was referring to these discourses that preceded his book. And you can read in Austrian literature, here begins Asia. I mean, this is not his Asia. It's also a quotation from a certain kind of Austrian literature, which also meant something different with that. I mean, that's what I mean with this imperialistic. You could find also in his books such strange, from today, looking at it from today, they are strange, these concepts, but they are embedded in a literature, and then you understand what he wants to say, or how he refers to them. Yeah.
But it is a gate, it is a limes of the West in many cultures. In Hungary, when you say Dunántúl, it means something. It's not only geographically, I think. Somehow in the subtext you have this, it's more developed, more, maybe even more beautiful or something. All the political correctness aside, you know. But in Serbian culture also, when we say Prečani, it means people from the other side of the Danube who are from the Balkans. It is a labeling in a sense, you know, and it's very old. It's very old in this Yugoslav or Serbian culture, you know, and it's very complex. It's really a pity that this conference couldn't last, and your presentation and Branko's presentation couldn't last for an hour, because it was really enjoyable. You know? Yeah. And Lydia, could I now
yes, please, yes.
move on, or any other questions? So I have a pleasure to give a word to Dr. Dana Hučková. I'm sorry if I hope I pronounced it well. From the Institute of the Literature Institute of the Slovak Academy of Sciences in Bratislava, and she will be talking. Her lecture is about the image of Danube in Slovak literature specifically, from a symbolical border of a region to open Europe. So please, Dana.
I have problem with my screen. I'm not. One moment, please.
just one more thing while we are waiting. Even if I remember it well, even when we were in school, when we were studying geography, and we were taught that the borders of the Balkan, one of the border of the Balkan Peninsula was Sava River and Danube River as well. Maybe it's not. I don't know if it's geographically true now.
Excuse me, I have some problems. I have some problems with connection. Good afternoon. I share screen. One moment, please. I have. Moment.
Now we have it.
No, that is not.
We just had it.
It's okay, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me. First of all, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank for invitation that I can participate in today's seminar. And on the beginning, my paper, a short basic information. The Danube is the river with the highest amount of water in Slovakia. Its length in Slovakia is 172 kilometers. Only 22 kilometers in Slovak territory. The remaining part creates a border with other countries. The Danube as a symbol representing a region once connected by a common history of nations in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy has an important position in Central Europe. The river also created an inner border. It functioned as an axis between the so-called Cisdanubiana and Transdanubiana, and it separated the northern regions of the historical Hungary from the southern ones, creating a line between the so-called Felvideg, Upper Hungary, roughly from today's Bratislava to the capital Budapest, and Delvideg, Lavarelet. Since Slovak inhabitant both regions, the image of the Danube was used for both of them in Slovak culture and literature. Linguistic explanation, the Danube is related to Indo-European Danu, meaning water, stream, river. Other meanings are deep water, big river, still deep water, source, rich stream, spring, under earth, lake. Dunaj in Slovak and Czech dialects works as a noun meaning water, fast flowing stream. General noun with a meaning water can still be found in phraseology and fairy tales. The image of the Danube in Central Slovak literature functioned to delimitate the Slovak territory, Slovak border, and Slovak national identity. Confirming the territory has a very important function in the life of a community, and the consciousness about its borders becomes an element that can define adherence or not adherence, and in some cases, also the type of adherence. The identity is never a factor obtained naturally and defined once and forever as something invariable. It is constantly exposed to processes of reformulations and influenced by contexts, changes, and relations connected with other identities. In the period of the Slovak national awakening in the 19th century, the expressions from the Tatars to the Danube served as a metaphor for Slovakia or Slovak countryside. This romantic concept denoted a long-lasting symbolical perception of the river. The Danube became a symbol of Slovakness, national space, and homeland. In literary texts by Slovak writers from the territory of today's Serbia, in Slovak enclaves in the Vojvodina, the image of Danube had a symbolical function of a connector with a distant homeland. It was also related to the heroic history of Serbs fighting for freedom, and later in travelogue literature it also obtained a practical function since it was an important travel route in the Balkans. Whereas in Slovak literature, the Danube is depicted as wild, dynamic, and fast, and Slovak authors from the Loverland, from Vojvodina, accordingly with the real landscape, showed it as slow, wide, and peaceful. The connection of the Tatars and the Danube as two basic elements delimiting the space of Slovakia became frequent in the first third of the 19th century. Besides Pavel Josef Šafárik, one can mention Jan Kollár, who named the third canto of his lyrical epical poem Slavica, the daughter of the mother Slava, the Danube. This canto contains 123 sonnets. Kollár used the image of the river with the delimitate the territory of Slavic nations. The Danube in his work is an element representing both identity and border. Other Slovak romantic poets such as Ľudovít Štúr, Janko Král, Samo Chalúbka, Jan Boto, Mikuláš Dohnán, Janko Matuška, Bohuslav Nosák, Nezabudov, and others developed a Kollár's concept. They repeatedly depicted and addressed the Danube as a witness of eras, reminding Slovaks of their past. The river also plays a similar role in poetry by Pavel Orsak Hviezdoslav on the turn of 19th and 20th centuries. In the 20s of the 20th century, in a collection of verse Dunaj and Sena by Emil Boleslav Lukács, a representative of Slovak modernist poetry, and later also in poetry of socialist realism, for example by Franjo Král or Wojciech Mihálik. When researching the theme of representation and or references of the Danube, an issue of a relation between the real river and the river in respective literary work appears. From this perspective, one can address the other related expressions, motives, and topory, such as border, allegory, personification, anthropomorphic predicates of the river, its animal images, color, or as a heavenfall self-murders, an attribute of death. The Danube often appears as personification and allegory. In visual arts, one can see it as a young man near its spring in Donau and Schengen, or as an old man in Bernini's fountain of four rivers in Rome. In the 19th century, Slovak poetry, it is a prince, an old or young man. Jan Kollár's sonnet in Slavica, number 309, the daughter of the mother Slava. It is a prince of all rivers, a grandfather wonderful of all Slavs. In Bohužnoslav Nezabudov, it is a young man that moves fast. On the image of the Danube in Slovak literature frequently contains colors, not only as an allusion to a famous Johann Strauss waltz and its further cultural and historical elaborations, but also in various visual and textual representations. The Danube is often blue, which implies cleanse, peace, remoteness, spiritually, but also emotional distance and unpleasant cold sensations, but also gray, navy, pale, white, dark, or black. These colors carry meanings in text since they are cultural conditions, such as positive or negative meanings, cold or warm sensations that already belong to linguistic and cultural context. Obviously, context in which these colors appear are equally important. Drawing in the Danube is often a solution of unhappy or unfulfilled relations. Valentin Benyak in a poem, Ice Death of the Danube, shows a different image. The river itself, chained by ice blocks, is depicted as a corpse. Similar to Ladislav Ťažký, the Danube is personified and compared to a robust animal that can, however, be easily tamed. Used by rowing in the river is a relatively traditional image that implies merging with water, abandoning one's will, flowing instead of struggling. One can mention, for example, in short story of Dobroslav Hrobák, Dominik Tatarka, and in poem other authors. The Danube often serves as a witness of conflicts, flies, and historical events. For example, the river is associated with the history of the period of the Great Moravia in the 9th century in the poem of Jan Kollár, the daughter of the mother Slava, with the person of the king Rastislav. The image of the Danube in Slovak literature is involved in creating the concept of Slovak culture and Slovak national identity. It implies various aspects about the heroic national past, but also existential angst of individuals. The Danube functions not only as a literary motif, but also as a cultural phenomenon. For example, Ladislav Ťažký, Slovak writer, with the history of the World War II is the river associated in his novelette trilogy Chrydel divých Adamov, A Flock of the Wild Adams. Ladislav Ťažký uses personification and allegory when showing the Danube. The river is an accomplice of the war, a just judge, and a victim. The Danube is reprimanded for being involved in the war and for being quality for it. The odor of the Danube reminds on one of a disgusting smell of fascism. The novelette Danubian Graves discusses fates of 4 soldiers who deserted from the army and tried to get from a German riverbank to the suburb of Bratislava, Petržalka, to a Slovak one in Bratislava. The Danube represents a border, freedom, life, but also death, since 2 of them died in the river. The Danube is perceived here as an animal that cannot control its instinct. People are responsible for war crimes, and there is no point in accusing the river. In this novelette, Ťažký creates images of the Danube as a silent witness that can be argued with, but also as a violent animal and inevitable grave. Neither Germans or Slovaks nor the war, but the Danube is the carriers of the dead. Dušan Šimko, a Slovak writer living in Switzerland, in his novel Gubio, in a chapter, The Owner in Iron Monjay, of his novel from 2009, refers to a mass killing that took place on Second World War in Novi Sad. The Hungarian occupation killed 1,246 civilians, mostly Serbs, Romas, Jews, but also Slovaks, and threw their bodies in the Danube. It was a bitterly cold winter, and the Danube was frozen solid. Dynamite was used to make holes in the ice into which the shot bodies were thrown, sometimes still alive, to die as asphyxiation and drowning. The narration develops from these points into timelines, past and future ones. This approach conveys the stereotypes and are constant in human behavior. The oldest event in the plot takes place in 1849, when the Hungarian army bombed Novi Sad for the first time. The period of the Second World War II is the second event in the historical chronology, and the last event happened on the end of 20th century, when Novi Sad was bombed and all its bridges were destroyed. All tragic events were part of global events not directly related to the town and its inhabitants. The narrator combines these events with idyllic and nostalgic scene of his adolescence on the bank of the Danube. Michal Hvorocký wrote a novel, The Danube in America. This work from 2010 is a novel of adventure combined with an autobiographical travelogue. The author worked as a guide for American tourists on luxury Danube cruises for 2 years. Its first part takes place on the upper section of the river, the second one on the lower Danube. The second part is based on fiction rather than facts. Geographical and historical information became scarce, and the suspense culminates in a scene on the Serbo-Croatian border where passengers meet a group of aggressive Serbs. A reader experiences shock and a terra incognita. From this part of the text, the novel uses suspense, imagination, and fiction until the final scene of the boat sinking. Social conditions in the countries of the lower Danube tells the first part of the novel. Landscape creates a background of the plot, but it is also expresses a cultural distance from the north. The Balkans is terra incognita and terra non grata, a metaphor for extremes and discrepancies. Serbia is depicted as a dangerous territory of violent conflicts and sudden turnovers. Bratislava, metropolis on the Danube, it was a slogan of the socialist era. Bratislava, the beauty of the Danube. The river creates a significant nature and urbanistic element of the city. And the Danube, as a motive, of literary motive, is also in contemporary Slovak literature. William Klimáček, Jana Peňová, Michal Hvorocký, but also in a poetry collection, for example, Jan Buzáši collection, River Bank. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Questions? I especially liked the whole of your presentation, of course, Anna, but especially like the metaphor of the Slovaks living in these enclaves in Vojvodina who think that Danube is somehow the link, the artery which connects them to the motherland, and it's really nice, poetic.
It is very poetic image of these Vojvodian authors in Slovak from 19th and from 20th century. It is stereotype in this literature.
And I somehow this is really like my last question, and then others can of course ask. Is this I somehow this masculinity of the river, which in Slavic languages it's masculine, right? Am I right, or maybe I'm wrong? Does it
in Slovak it is,
masculine? Does it make it like more aggressive or more like somehow the symbolic of it?
But for example, Sándor Petőfi has one poem on Danube. Danube is a woman, but in Slovak literature it is a man.
Okay, and Julia But has a question or a comment.
Yes, thank you. I hope everybody can listen me
yes,
well. So, Dana, thank you very much for your fascinating talk. My question is, did Slovak poets and writers exploit any other names of the river under discussion? I'll explain. So when I studied poems written in German in the 19th century as well, I often came across the fact that they preferred to use, ancient names like Easter instead of Danube. Yes, and so this refer not only to the river, but also they preferred to use Pannonia instead of Hungary or Hungarian land. So did the Slovak poets also used these ancient names, and for what reason? That is my question. Thank you.
This is older Greek name, Easter, and topographical names of Czechoslovakia. This is book. This is Easter is rolling river, and Dunaj Danube is Easter as a synonym as in poetry and in prose. Dunaj Danube Easter. It is some egal.
So they, but can you give us more details, please? So was it more useful for them to use Danube or Easter?
Dunaj, it is more, but Easter is a poetic name.
Poetic, just for poetic reasons. Okay, thank you very much.
So any questions? More questions, more comments? If not, we can continue. Dana,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Could you please stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And now my special job and pleasure is to welcome Oxana Yakimenko from Herzen State Pedagogical University in St. Petersburg. Usually Oxana talks about Hungarian literature, but today we have an amazing chance to hear about the Danube in Hungarian film. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I'll be sharing my screen a lot because I have to, and I'm sorry I can't put my presentation. I mean, I cannot have it in full because I will have to switch to the videos from time to time. So I hope that by the end of the day, I mean, we've heard a lot of presentations, and I will provide some entertainment as well. I mean, not only research and analysis, but also some entertainment. I mean, the topic is huge because the Danube is featured in Hungarian film, and not only in Hungarian film, as you will learn from my presentation. Obviously, you know that it is featured in a lot of films made in Central Europe by various countries, I mean, by filmmakers from various countries. But it has, I mean, the river itself has always been an important source of symbols and metaphors in Hungarian culture. Speaking of the film, in the 1910s and 1920s, film gradually becomes a significant artistic medium, and not only a means of documenting reality. So the river obviously starts playing an important role in Hungarian moving pictures. With Hungarian film being extremely literature-centric, especially in its early years, it is only natural that some of the earlier Danube's screen depictions are those in screen adaptations. And I'm now going to show you a very short piece from the first adaptation of the I have to be very careful, from the Man of Gold by Sándor Korda, or Alexander Korda, made in 1918, but it is more often marked as 1919, with The Man with the Golden Touch, or the Man of Gold, is a novel by Mór Jókai. And in the novel, the river works both as a visual setting and a narrative vehicle. It is associated with the concepts of eternal life and ephemeral experiences, seen as connection between past and the present in their characters' lives, corresponds to the rise and fall of the people's lives and careers. Most of these connotations find their way into Korda's film, and I'm going to show you the sequence when the character arrives at the No Man's Island, and it emphasizes coming, the director emphasizes coming to the island by water, which is shown as a rite of passage. So technically, it was a notable experience of filming in a natural setting, and there were two other adaptations of the film in which the river, well, because technology was evolving and it was easier to shoot outside, gets an even greater part, especially in the 1962 adaptation. And I'm now going to show you a very short sequence. I mean, they're all everything that I'm going to show you is like 1 minute. When the characters arrive at the No Man Island, and here you will see a beautiful panorama of the Danube.
Fogytál az élelmet. Italunk sincs már. Hozzák elő a csónakot.
I'm sorry.
Fogytál az élelmet. Italunk sincs.
Sorry. There it is.
Ott távol egy kis sziget van. Megnézzük. Fogytál az élelmet. Italunk sincs már.
You can see that, of course, I mean, the color allows for more magnificent images. In between, well, the island itself looks very different if you look at, I mean, in real life. If you look at very short Romanian there's a short Romanian documentary about this island in 1960s. So it's about the time when the third screen adaptation was made. By that moment, by that period, the island looked like
aproape
that.
cu 40 de metri. Odată însă cu creșterea apelor, va dispare și insula Adacale, renumită pentru farmecul său exotic, dar mai cu seamă pentru cetatea pe care o adăpostește. Importanța acestui...
So it was, I mean, the film obviously was shot not in the original setting. Going back, oops, sorry, since I have too many screens to show. In between the two world wars, the Danube as a waterway and as a source of various water or river-based tropes gives way to the Tisa River and the Lake of Balaton, and the most striking images of water are found in the films that depict these two. Well, the Tisa River as the waterway, and Lake Balaton as the body of water. This might have had to do with the post-Trianon traumatic experiences and unwillingness, probably, to remind on the screen, to remind the audience once again of the former scale of the country lost to the war. There was obviously a practical side to it, because shooting a full-scale film on the river for Hungarian filmmakers was not only an expensive endeavor, they also had to get access to their former territories of Hungary, so it wasn't easy. And in the films, when we look at the 1920s, well, late 1920s, early 1930s films, we see that the Danube, if ever shown in the films, is only portrayed in Budapest. And one of the emblematic films of the period is the Rendezvous on the Danube, Dunaparti Rendezvous, made in 1936. Despite the name, I mean, the film is called Rendezvous on the Danube, you don't actually see the river in the film. So there are a couple of shots only. It is featured, as you can see it written on the slide, for a couple of seconds. And the film is actually about a book, which is called Rendezvous on the Danube. And it's a typical story of a wannabe writer who wants to marry a rich girl and is only able to marry her after he writes a best-selling novel that makes him rich as well. However, the most striking and amazing, I mean, I'm not afraid to say this word, take on the Danube theme is a German film by a director called Stemmler. It is called The Danube Pilot, Donauschiffer, and is loosely based on the novel by Jules Verne by the same title. It is starring Hungarian actor Pál Jávor, and the film features the river at its fullest. It was shot in Vienna, in Bratislava, in Esztergom, in Budapest, in Belgrade, and at the Iron Gate. And it allows us a glimpse at a tug, what is also interesting about this film. The boat that you can see in the picture here is an actual tug that was built. It was named Kolovrat initially, and was built in Óbuda in 1848. So it is a 19th century boat. It was later known as Fortuna and Nick, and probably the oldest Hungarian-built vessel recorded on screen. And the river in the film is seen as a full-fledged protagonist. In the review that was written in 1940 in the magazine Magyar Film, reads as follows, I quote, "So far, we've seen very few foreign films with so many Hungary-related aspects. The main character here is the Danube, the great waterway of the southeastern Europe. The story presents the life of the Danube boatman in its simplicity. And this is exactly what makes the film so captivating. During the tug's journey, we see our capital in its nocturnal splendor. We also meet a small team of Hungarians on board the vessel. Familiar homely atmosphere is present throughout the whole film, or is present, sorry, throughout the whole film. We feel as if we are watching a truly Hungarian film. The river is shown on the screen in all its vastness, by day and by night. It also serves as a setting for dramatic scenes, like the one with two contesting steamboats almost running aground and into each other. The waterway does indeed feel as a dangerous place, not only as a beautiful place, and also as an element of nature being tamed by human skill and ability. Later in 1970, and I'm now going to show you a small bit from the film with this diversity, panoramic diversity.
Wer? Ein kleiner Vogel. Unten der Käfig ist leer. Wenn ich aus diesem Dampfer fahre, ist immer was passiert. Die Fortuna hat kein Glück.
And I have to remind you, this is 1940. So it is indeed a very, well, technically sophisticated piece of filmmaking, and also a very expensive one, which was available, I mean, which was possible in the German film, but was not that really possible in the Hungarian film of the period. The same novel was adapted for screen by Hungarian director Miklós Markos in 1974. And in his version, the Danube looks less grand, but more romantic and dreamy, rather corresponding to the original of the novel, I mean, to the adventure thriller air of the novel by Jules Verne, and also celebrates the Great River. What is also important about the Jules Verne and Yoke novels and their screen adaptations, for that matter, is they both, I mean, both writers and all the films employ the criminal aspect of the river that is also used not only for pleasure, not only for work, but also for smuggling and human trafficking. So this beautiful background should not deceive the viewer, and we'll come back to this aspect of the river later in the 20th or 21st century, basically. In the post-war Hungarian film, I also have to mention one more film, which is also not Hungarian, but is called The Red Danube, made by George Sidney. Well, most of it takes place in Vienna, but again, I mean, it's a film that is called The Red Danube. It's like the Danube, the rendezvous on the Danube, but doesn't feature the river at all. So the river is used in the title, but you don't see the river in the film. I'm not going to go too deep into this story. Also, very, very interesting. I mean, it's a separate story. Speaking of the post-war Hungarian films, I'm speaking about the Soviet post-war Hungarian films, because between 1940 basically, and 1949, there's been very little Hungarian film production, if any. And we're talking about the Rákosi period Hungarian filmmaking. The Danube is seen either as a source of economic wealth in line with the communist doctrine of taming nature, or as a site for vigorous leisure activities, like in the film The State Department Store Alom Yaro has. And I found a Russian poster for the film. I'm now going to show you a bit of the song from this film, which shows the way that the Danube was perceived as a site for leisure activities.
Szép az idő, 100 evező, csattog a vízben már.
Magasba szárnyal a dal, 100 fiatal, éneket vígan száll. Egy Dunaparti csónakházban, nagy a jókedv minden nap. Úszik az ember boldogságban, és a szél meg a víz simogat.
Napozunk órák hosszat lázban, és a csókból csattan 100.
Olyan szép a Dunán, ilyen nyári délután, de vidám ez a csónakházban. Egy Dunaparti csónakházban,
kicsit elvágyaszt a nap.
Amíg a parton pingpongláz van, a kovács most mattot kap. Kucsú a vízbe, gyorsan hajtás, ide dobd a nagy labdát. Olyan szép a Dunán, ilyen nyári délután, de vidám ez a csónakház.
Reszketek a napszúrástól, ez a kalap drága kincs.
20 forintot kérek, mivel vízi jártassága nincs.
I will show you the end of the clip, because it's I don't want to pause on it too long. You can see that you have a lot of people swimming, boating, rowing on the river. The other side of the river we see the other aspect of the river is when the Danube is used as a scene for the confessions, for pondering, for realizations. And the best example of it is a film called Young Hearts, or If You See Well, also made in 1953 by Martin Kaleti. And I want to show you the last bit of the film, which also shows a mass scene with a lot of people in it. However, the most important episodes, fragments of the film that take place on the Danube are when the main character János Dani makes a life-changing decision that will help him win his sweetheart's affection, and the bad guy confesses that he wants to go to America. And also there's a very important conversation that takes place on the Danube, when the father of the main character, in the dark, in the twilight, explains to his son what life was like under the Horthy regime. And I'm going to show the last bit of the film when with a triumphant song, How Beautiful is the Light, and the young Turner apprentice enters new life on board of a boat that takes, well, it's a bunch of Turner apprentices who are swimming towards the future. Ну, да, извините, пожалуйста. Это другой. Так, вот так вот. So basically, this is a very typical Danube scene in the 1950s, early 1960s Hungarian film. Another interesting altern and a new metaphor for the Danube is found in the mid-60s by István Szabó in his film The Father, or Apa. And it's a totally different take on father-son relations, I mean, compared to the Young Hearts. The Danube it still plays a crucial role in the son realizing his goal in life. In a touching personal account of the narrator who invents, actually in the film, a heroic father to compensate for his own immaturity and that of his generation. The protagonist, Bence, can only imagine a father for himself, but at the end of the film, he realizes that he has to face the tales of his childhood, and he must rebuild his imaginary world, connect to his real father. And in the last scene of the film, he swims across the Danube, and because he had a story before, he told everyone a story how his father swam across the icy Danube. And although the Danube here is not icy, Bence performs the task, proving to himself that he can rise above his father's myth. And I will show you a bit of this clipping from the film, and you will see what happens in the end when the main character is joined by a lot of young people swimming across the Danube, thus finding their aim in life, their meaning of life.
Adjatok nekem is valamit hagyni. Ha? Mennyiben? 2. 8. 9. 14. 13. Igen, ezt is mondom.
Át kell úsznom a Dunát. Egyszer kell csinálnom valamit a magam erejéből. Csak a magam erejéből, ami erőt és kitartást igényel. Amit nem lehet abba hagyni, aminek nem lehet visszafordulni a felénél. Át kell úszni a Dunát egyedül. Nem mesélni, hogy apa átúszta. Higgyetek nekem, mint ha én úsztam volna át. A gyöngék mesélnek, csak a gyöngék. Milyen jó úszni. Nagy tempókkal, így, nyugodtan. Megbírom. Jól bírom. Csak végig így. Akarom, hogy bírjam. Ha átérek, gyönyörű lesz. Csodálatos érzés. Át kell úsznom a Dunát. Persze ez póz. Lehet, hogy póz. Az unokám majd mesélheti. Nagyapám többször átúszta a Dunát. Jól van. De nekem ezt akkor is meg kell tennem. Egyedül át kell úszni a saját erőmből. Most nem segít senki. Tudom, hogy egyedül vagyok teljesen. Ha bármi történik közben, akkor is. De egyszer meg kell küzdenem egyedül.
The director shows him to be part of the whole generation doing this. And it's a very beautiful shot and a beautiful message. so I'm not going to show any. Sorry, I'm not going to show any more films. So I'll be. I'm going to finish in a couple of minutes. In the words of the director Peter Baccio, the Danube is larger than itself. It is a metaphor for history, for fate, and the river indeed becomes a protagonist in his film, The Witness, Otono, made in 1969. And it stands, well, the river stands for homeland, doom, and ruthless reality. I'm quoting Fazekas from 2018. The river avenges the dam guard when he does not take care of it. It is revealed in various conditions, in various states. Most important conversations and turns of the plot have to do with the river, and it is indeed one of the most powerful portrayals of the river in Hungarian film. The river, the Danube, also serves as a memory device and a history device. In the documentaries made in the 1990s, especially in the Danube Exodus by Peter Forgage, which tells a story, well, actually uses, based on found footage, and uses a story of an exodus in two opposite directions, driven by different political forces. And the film, this documentary film, features the footage made by a sea captain who, in the summer of 1939, ran one of the ships hired by the Jewish community in Bratislava to bring a group of 900 Jews from Slovakia, from Hungary and Austria down to the Black Sea. And from there, they sailed to Palestine. And one of the ships was the Erzsébet Király, Queen Elizabeth, and the commander, the captain, Nander Andrašović, he was an amateur filmmaker, so he filmed a lot of it. A year later, the same captain and his ship were transporting hundreds of refugees from the Black Sea up the river, and the German community from Bessarabia was looking for safety after the country was invaded by the Soviet army. And probably the most encompassing picture of the Danube can be found in the 2008, sorry, I forgot the date here, in the 2008 film by Carnel Mundruzzo called The Delta. Following the trend of turning the Danube into a character of the film, it is indeed one of the most powerful portraits of the river. And it's a contemporary story that develops into a Greek tragedy and is set in the vastness of the Danube Delta. Here, the river flows like steel blue oil. I'm quoting an article from the New York Times, and combines the joy of nature with the funeral, with the grief of funeral procession, with people crossing the Danube as they would be crossing the Styx itself. Apart from being a magnificent setting, the river here works as a visual metaphor or metaphors, starting from the fact that the siblings involved in an incestuous romance literally built a house on the water. You can see it here. And the whole tragedy sinks into the lazy waters of the delta, followed by an Angelopolis-like parade of boats on its surface. So basically, what I was trying to show in this short overview, and of course, I'm going to be writing an article about this, is that the Danube is can be and is used and has been used by numerous filmmakers in numerous ways, in various ways, to as a metaphor, as a character, as a setting, and we can see various trends of using it in various ages of filmmaking, and I think it deserves to be filmed a lot. I haven't talked about the documentaries much, but there are a lot of documentaries about the Danube, made by Hungarian filmmakers as well.
Thank you very much for your amazing presentation. Actually, we have time for one question, one brief question to Oxana. Yes, Dr. Ralls?
Okay, it's home field for me because I'm Hungarian. And first of all, congratulations for that. A short question: why specialize you to the Hungarian field, Hungarian movies?
No,
Which was the motivation?
No, I teach Hungarian literature, and but I do write regularly about Hungarian film. It's just fringe, well, not fringe, but I am interested in film as a medium, and I've studied some film history, and I have actually translated maybe about 100 Hungarian films into Russian.
Yeah.
So,
no, I mean personal motivation. No. Okay, not necessary.
No, I mean, well, Hungarian film is a huge topic. I mean, it's vast. There's a lot to. I mean, it has given birth to a lot of national filmmaking traditions. I mean, not only Hungarian. So Hungarian filmmakers brought forward a lot of national filmmaking traditions all over the world. So, I mean, it's worth looking into.
Yeah, but only one association I thinking during your presentation, that there is a special type of Hungarian movie called Eastern. It's made on the borderline area, and the most important environmental background, the shortage of water. Not enough water. It's
exactly.
other corner.
Exactly. No, but this 1974 film based on the Jules Verne novel, it does have this Eastern air about it, and it is happening on the river. So yeah, I know what you're talking about, but it's a separate story.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I see Dr. Király has a question. Yes.
Yeah, it was really overwhelming, but and there are many questions about these films. But I just want to ask a question about the materiality of the river as it is shown in the films. Is there something that is very attractive to filmmakers about what would you say? What is it that is?
Well, it is obvious. It is obvious that you can. It is very easy to see. There are periods in Hungarian filmmaking and in Hungarian photography when the technology evolves, when gadgets evolve, and people try to. For example, they try to film at night, as you could see in the German film. I mean, it's a German film, but still, there's a lot of filming of the night.
The director is Hungarian.
Exactly. So it has to do with the development of technology. First and foremost, I mean, we might talk about the beautiful images, but the moment you have new technology, you want to try it on all possible surfaces, and water is an amazing surface and very difficult to capture.
Yeah.
And you can see that, for example, in 1960s, when you have this color, color and then problems with color film. It's all dim. It's all a bit dim, the whole setting. And for example, in the Mundruzo film, in a way, I mean, one can suggest that he's kind of arguing with the previous depictions of the Danube, because they were so dim, and his depiction is so full of light. It's very it's striking in many ways,
But you know, he had another. This is the second version of this film, as you know, and the first one was much darker.
Yeah, I know. And well, Mundruca is generally obsessed with the Danube. He even uses footage of the Danube in his theater productions. He used the one in the It's Hard to Be a God in his theater production. There is this a parallel action taking place on screen, and the extraterrestrials, or the people from the more developed planet, are floating on boats along the Danube, around the Danube Delta. So he does use this delta and the Danube a lot everywhere.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe somebody would like to ask more general questions to our speakers. Or...
Maybe I
don't. Yes, please.
Just inspired by our presentations on literature and culture, I started thinking about, is Danube used as a landscape for some anti-utopia? I was thinking about Vasily Aksionov and island Crimea, when a peninsula turns into an island for some artistic reason. Are there any similar experiments with the Danube as a river for some very fictional and anti-utopial plot? Maybe, or maybe not.
I think it was also a place for utopias. I would just make this point. Not only dystopias are there, but there are a lot of Robinsonades at the Danube. I don't know about the Crimea, but the first film that Oxana was showing, this The Man with the Golden Touch, that is a utopian Robinsonade practically, where there are no hierarchies, but in those boat houses around Budapest in the 50s, and much more in the interwar period, when there was no a socialist system. These were utopian landscapes where people went to be free of everything else, just like probably in close to any big city. It's not just specific Hungarian. I can imagine that such things existed also on the upper Danube and on the lower Danube, right? Just to escape the normality.
Well, I don't know if there are any books or films on the topic, but I do know a community of artists who lived on boats in Újpest, for example, and there's still some left. I mean, they were active in the 70s and in the 70s, I guess, in the 80s, but they chose to live on boats. So I personally know a poet and an artist who actually lives on it still. I mean, he's kind of not the youngest man, but he still lives on a boat that he bought at some point.
Thank you.
And just an appendix to this dystopia thing. The contemporary Hungarian writer László Krasznahorkai, in one of his very early book of short stories, which is called Novels About Death, Halál novellák. It's not the title. The title is more complex, but the main novel, the first novel, is called The Last Boat, Az utolsó hajó, and he's talking about some group of people who are going on a Danube in a boat, and it's a group of like middle-aged alcoholics and drug addicts or something, and one of them just points from the boat and says, "You see, people, you see that was Hungary. That used to be Hungary." So it's a complete dystopia. Like they are leaving, the last people leaving the country.
I'm also thinking about János Téré's the others about the ice age, where the Danube is frozen. So I think it's also a dystopian picture of the Danube frozen and no life.
But this Adakale island from the Yokai novel, actually, it was destroyed. It was destroyed when this Gjerdap was built in 1960 something or 1970s, I don't know.
Well, this piece of footage that I showed was from 1966, I think.
Before the destruction, yeah.
Before the destruction.
Basically, the frozen Danube is always a sign of great changes, because we know how King Matthias was elected, and I think this topos might be used more often, probably in literary works. But thank you for your inspirational answers. And if there
yes,
are no...
and now we can close our session.
Yes, I'd like to thank our wonderful moderators who conducted a wonderful second section of our round table. And I think I'd like to thank all speakers of the first section who were with us. I'm very happy with our work today. I just see how an idea which was first developed by Daria and then very emotionally supported by Oxana, that it came true as interdisciplinary as it was only possible and international as we could not even hope. And what we see is that the Danube is a river which unites countries, unites nations which live along the this river, and it unites us, people who study the Danube as an object, and people who are listening to the results of these excellent studies. So let me thank you once again, and we will write to you about our hopes and expectations concerning the publication of the results of your works, because we would love to see it maybe not as a separate volume, but as sections of our yearbook, which I was presenting at the beginning of our round table. So please consider generously our requests to continue our cooperation, and you are always welcome at our Zoom meetings. And as our colleagues has already told today, we also hope that someday we will meet personally and discuss in much more human and friendly atmosphere. Thank you once again, and hope to see you in different surroundings, in different places. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.